Hello, and welcome to your next Flipped Notes lecture on the U.S. Constitution. Now, the first part of the Constitution is what we call the preamble. What the preamble essentially is an introduction to what the Constitution is all about. It outlines the purposes and guiding principles of the Constitution. If you think about it in an essay form, this tells us what we can expect from the rest of the Constitution. What is the argument being made? So off here to your right you see the actual words. Now, after any introduction, you have the articles of a paper. Now, the articles are what we call the body of the Constitution. Article 1, the first part of the Constitution, is the legislative branch, what we commonly refer to as Congress. The U.S. Capitol is Congress building. You've seen pictures of this building before. That's the U.S. Capitol, and within there is what we call our Congress. In Congress, we have two different bodies. We have the House of Representatives, and we have the Senate. The House of Representatives, as you might remember from the compromises, was the House based on population. And so each state has representatives based on its proportional population size. Therefore, California gets 53, whereas Wisconsin only gets 8. Then you have the Senate, where each state has 2 senators. Now, in the House of Representatives, we have our representative. Currently, as of December 2012, we have Tammy Baldwin. That is soon going to be Mark Pocan. And the House of Representatives is based on state population. Each district gets to send a representative. They're considered the voice of the people, and their terms, how long they are in office, is only 2 years. There are 435 members in the House. That's how many we have capped it at, and so we divide our population overall between 435. So Wisconsin gets 8 representatives. Tammy Baldwin is our current representative in District 2, which is where Beloit is. However, she will soon become the U.S. Senator from Wisconsin. So here you see Tammy Baldwin's district. Like I said before, this will soon become Mark Pocan's district. And so here you see District 2 consists of Beloit, Madison, and some of the surrounding areas. However, you might notice that it juts around to the left here. As you might recall, this is Janesville. The reason why Janesville is left out of Congressional District 2 is because who lives in Janesville? Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan is the representative from District 1 right here. And so they have done it so that they've drawn the lines in such a way that Paul Ryan and the Republicans got to keep their district, and Tammy Baldwin and the Democrats got to keep their district in District 2, which includes Madison, which is pretty liberal. So you see over here districts 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 8. You might notice that District 4 right here is very small. That's because that contains Milwaukee. Such a small district in size because there's so many people there. Whereas all the people that are in that little area, it's about the same as all this area up in northwestern Wisconsin. Now the Senate. Currently we have 2 senators. Well, we'll always have 2 senators, but our current 2 senators are Ron Johnson, a Republican, and Herb Kohl, a Democrat. Herb is retiring soon. Senator Kohl is retiring, and that is who Tammy Baldwin is taking over for. Now, each senator represents the entire state. They don't divide the state. They have to represent all of it. A senator serves 6 years, a pretty long time. And so what ends up happening is every election, every 2 years, a third of the Senate is up for re-election. Therefore, there's always at least 2/3 of the Senate around every new Congress, so that there's some continuity, there's some experience that stays around, so that people know what to do. Now, Article 1, Section 8 outlines powers granted to Congress. There are 2 types of powers. There are the enumerated powers, which means listed powers, and these are powers that are directly stated in the Constitution, such as the power to tax, the power to create post offices, the power to declare war, etc. And those are ones that back in 1787 the founders said, obviously our Congress needs to have that power. However, they knew that they would not be able to look all that far into the future. They had no idea that there'd be, radios, television, internet, airplanes, space shuttles, all those kinds of things. So they made something called the Elastic Clause. And it's a part in the Constitution that says that the Congress shall also have the power to make all necessary and proper laws. Well, what does necessary and proper mean? It's pretty vague. It's not very specific. And so some people don't like that. They say that Congress should only be able to do what it says in the Constitution. That's a big basis of the argument between conservatives and liberals. However, the main point you should take away, or the biggest point you should take away, is that the main duty or responsibility of Congress is to pass laws. They are the body that makes all the laws that govern our land, at least at the federal level. Alright, so that's Article 1, the legislative branch. Article 2 is the executive branch, the president. Obviously here you see pictures of the White House, which is where the president lives. Now, the presidency was initiated in response to the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. In the first government we had under the Articles, we didn't have an executive. There wasn't really a leader of our government. Therefore, it was really weak. And so when we wrote our Constitution, we wanted some kind of leader, an executive. However, the powers granted to the president are broad and vague. Their exact meaning are open to interpretation. A lot of the powers are there for wild cards. How would this cause problems? Well, as over time has passed, each president has essentially taken more and more liberty to expand its powers. So the president that George Washington was back in 1700s is very different than Obama today. Very, very different. Those powers have become more and more. So ultimately, the main duty or responsibility of the president is to carry out and enforce laws. And the biggest ones being protecting life, liberty, your freedoms, and your property. However, the president can't all do this. He has millions of people in his employment. He doesn't guard the country single-handedly. He has millions of soldiers to do that for us. They're part of the executive branch. So are the postal office workers, Department of Education workers, different lawyers, things like that. These are the people who are working for the president as part of the executive branch. So Article 1 was the legislative, Article 2 was the presidency, and Article 3 is the judiciary, the judicial branch. By judicial branch, we mean justice, judges. The biggest one of which being the Supreme Court. You see this picture here. This is in Washington, D.C. This is the highest court in the land. If you don't like a certain opinion or a certain ruling, you could possibly appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. They have the final say. And so the Article 3 establishes the Supreme Court and also allows Congress to establish all inferior courts, which means the lower courts. So in the U.S. you see that we have two levels of courts. You have the federal courts, which deal with constitutional law. So say if your freedom of speech was abridged, that it was attacked and limited, you'd appeal to a federal court. Whereas if you were convicted of a DUI, pulled over for a DUI, you'd be in the state courts because that deals with state laws. Ultimately, the Supreme Court and the judicial branch's responsibility is to review the laws and determine, are they constitutional? Are the laws within the powers of Congress or the presidency? Does the Constitution allow them to do it? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. One other thing, you'll see these pictures right here of all the Supreme Court justices. There's 9 of them, and they're appointed for life. This is very important because if they're appointed for life, they don't have to worry about being reappointed in a few years or however amount of time. Because if they were, they might think of who would reappoint them. As they're making their Supreme Court decisions, they would ultimately be thinking, is this decision going to appease, is it going to please the person in charge? So they're going to have some bias. So this lets them be without influence and things like that. And we want that. We want our justices to be unbiased. We want them to be fair and just looking at the law, not thinking about keeping their job. Now, we went over the introduction and the body of what would be an essay, which in this case is the Constitution. Now we have a conclusion. And for the Constitution, that's the amendments. Now, the U.S. has changed dramatically over the last 200 years, yet the Constitution has survived due to its ability to be amended and interpreted to fit the times. This is where we get the phrase that the Constitution is a living document. It can be changed when needed. So there are two ways that the Constitution can be changed or amended: the formal amendment process and the informal amendment process. The formal amendment process is laid out in Article 5. It says that the National Congress must propose it, and it must be ratified then by the states. Dozens are suggested each year, but very few pass. And so when both the Congress and the states agree to it, this amounts to consent of the people. Ultimately, there have been 33 amendments that have been proposed and passed by Congress, but only 27 of them have been approved by the states. These are the 27 we know today. However, the main point here is that formal amendments actually alter or add words to the Constitution. Think about it this way: if you're writing an essay, this is you deleting some words and changing them, actually changing the overall document. That is the formal amendment process. So we have the 27 amendments. The first 10 are what we refer to as the Bill of Rights, and they were ratified in 1791. Pardon the interruption, we had a visitor. As I was saying, the Bill of Rights guarantees the freedom of expression, belief, fair and equal treatment under the law, and it deals with the civil rights of individuals that no one or government can deny. Those are very important. Those are freedom of speech, freedom against unjust search and seizure. All of those are very important first 10 amendments. Then we have what we call the Civil War amendments. Those are the 13th, 14th, and 15th. The 13th ended slavery. The 14th gave citizenship to those slaves. And the 15th forbid the restriction on the right to vote based on race, color, or former servitude. So it gave former slaves the right to vote. Then we have the voting amendments. Obviously here we have the 15th Amendment again. We have the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, very important. And then we had the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age to 18. Prior to this amendment, most states said you had to be 21 years of age to vote. But during the Vietnam War, when 18-year-olds were being drafted and sent against their will to fight for our country, there was an argument to be made that if these people could die for our country, they should be able to vote, and people agreed. There's the alcohol amendments. By that, there was the 18th Amendment, which established prohibition, which made the buying, making, selling of alcohol illegal. People didn't want it anymore. But then the 21st Amendment came around and we repealed the 18th Amendment. We said, actually, we're going to redo that one. We made a mistake. And they said, yes, we should be able to buy, make, and sell alcohol. And so this is the only amendment ever to be repealed, which is very special. Now, the informal amendment process deals with the day-to-day experiences of the government. It fills in the details of government to fit the needs of the times. And so it only changes it by the way of its application and interpretation. So nothing's actually being changed, just how it's being carried out. There's 5 basic ways to do this. There's basic legislation, which is laws. Executive action, where the president makes a decree, which he has the right to do. There are court decisions, when the court says something's legal or not. Political party practices. There was no mention of political parties in the first Constitution, or in our Constitution. And so how they operate is completely new. And then there's custom, just what we've come accustomed to. The president's cabinet of advisors, and the fact that there's no third term for a president, that after 2 terms you should walk off. Now there's an actual amendment that says you have to. So once again, the main difference is that formal amendments, you actually alter or add words to the Constitution, whereas informal is you do not change it, you just change the application and interpretation. There's 6 principles in the Constitution: popular sovereignty, the idea that people are the only legitimate source of power; federalism, the division of power between the states and the national government. It ensures the concept of limited government. There's separation of powers, that power is divided between 3 branches. There's checks and balances, which each branch has some control over the other. Judicial review, Supreme Court determines the constitutionality of law. And limited government, that government is not all-powerful. There are controls on it. That concludes your notes. Thank you, and have a great day.